I'm Patty Mulvihill, the Executive Director for the League of Oregon Cities. Thank you for coming to today's legislative webinar. A few quick things to note first. First, make sure if you haven't already done so that your microphone is muted. It will help reduce background noise. If you're called upon to ask a question once we finish our presentations, it's at that point that I would ask you to unmute yourself so that you could ask your question. If you haven't yet done so, please make sure that you identify yourself by your name and the city or organization you represent. If you need help doing that, you can see instructions in the chat. This is a reminder that this webinar is a public space. All are welcome to attend, and you should have probably already received a notice that we are recording these webinars. Questions are going to be held to the end, much like we did last time. That will make sure that we can get you the information that you need. When it's time for question and answer, staff will monitor and identify who to call on when. This webinar is going to end promptly at 1 o'clock. If we haven't answered everybody's questions, please know that you can contact LOC staff directly with those questions. We have several LOC lobbyists here with us today. I'm going to ask all of those lobbyists before we leave today that they please put their name and their contact information in the chat. That way you'll be able to talk to them if you need help or assistance. And as always, you can follow all of our legislative activities on our website at www.orcities.org. Today, we're going to cover quite a few topics. Hopefully, we'll get through them fast enough so that we can take your question and answers. We're going to talk about our housing needs analysis bill, the DLCD budget. We'll give an update on the governor's recent emergency orders related to homelessness and housing. We will talk extensively about public records, some ratepayer assistance programs, some broadband funding, and we'll finish off the presentation with an update on where things stand with a possible semiconductor package. We're going to start first with housing needs analysis. So I'd like to ask Ariel Nelson, the League's land use and housing lobbyist, to unmute herself and give us an update specifically on House Bill 2889.
Hi, everyone. House Bill 2889 is a priority bill coming out of the House Housing Committee, and it has bipartisan and bicameral support, so both the House and Senate. And it's been identified as a bill that both parties and chambers want to include in an early 60-day legislative and funding package. So that would bring us around a March 17th kind of date to pass that. It is a continuation of some legislation that started in 2019. House Bill 2003 established requirements for cities above 10,000 population to be on a regular schedule for updating their housing plans and to start doing what's called a housing production strategy. This bill this year, 2889, puts more details on that. It provides more updates to our housing goal 10 in the land use system, and most specifically for cities, establishes actual housing production targets, so numbers and types and income levels of housing that a city should be trying to encourage the development of, and then actually provides some accountability metrics and how cities will be measured. There's a big report and work group effort over the last 3 years that DLCD has led that kind of has led to this legislation. So it's a very technical bill. It will be impactful for those cities, but the impacts are spread out over the next several biennia, so it's not an immediate impact, but still very important one for your planning folks to be watching. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out to me. Because it is on the 60-day timeline, we're really digging in sooner than later. It has a public hearing on Thursday next week to dig into some forthcoming -1 amendments that bring the details on that accountability piece.
Thank you, Ariel. Quick question. Is that going to be applicable to all cities? Are there any population thresholds for it to apply to?
Right. So it's just applicable to cities at the population of 10,000 or above, as well as small cities within the metro region. So, and that's in line with the earlier legislation, House Bill 2003. So if you know that you're a House Bill 2003 community, then this bill will apply to you as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Ariel. I'm going to stick with you if we can for a minute. And can you give us an update on House Bill 5027, which I believe establishes the budget for DLCD this year?
Yes. So the public hearing for DLCD's budget bill is going to be Tuesday in the Ways and Means Subcommittee on Natural Resources. They are starting to have public hearings on every agency budget, and this is really the first and best opportunity to get on the record about the importance of their funding at DLCD for cities and for local government. So there's kind of there's an overall theme that I'm going to be testifying on, which is that cities are implementing all of the things and all of the land use goals. And the legislature can't just be, needs to be thinking about the overall impact of all policies and what that capacity impact is on cities and what funds are needed. So we'll be bringing that message forward really strongly, and also focusing on the importance of local planning grants. The governor's recommended budget is kind of leading, in terms of her proposal that's out there, which provides a lot of funding to implement the bill I just talked about, the 2889 Oregon Housing Needs Analysis. But remember, that bill only applies to cities at 10,000 and above. So we want to make sure that there are small city planning grants and resources included for the rest of the state. Luckily, our partners at DLCD did get a legislative change in an earlier session, such that any resources under the statutes for this latest bill are eligible for smaller cities. But we want to make it really abundantly clear that these planning resources are really critical for small cities and that you have needs and need to grow and update your plans as well. So this is really just a very strong urging to please come testify and also put letters on the record. It's really great. We have hybrid testimony now. You have to sign up, I think, within an hour before the hearing starts. But you could just, come in on Microsoft Teams. You'll get a link right away. You'll probably only have about 90 seconds to 2 minutes to talk. But so, it doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be super formal, but if you or your planning director or someone from your city can come and just, quickly talk about the importance of the resources at DLCD or what your planning and development needs are, that will be really impactful for this hearing. You can also put testimony on the record, and they keep the record open for 48 hours after the start of the hearing. So you'll have until Thursday at 1 p.m. to get that in, but I would really urge you to get it in ahead of the 1 o'clock hearing on Tuesday, because that's when the committee really looks at the record. And it's so much more impactful to have multiple cities showing up on the list and seeing all of the testimony on the record. It's far more impactful than one letter from LOC or one testimony from myself. So really, please, if you do nothing else legislative wise in the next few weeks, please make sure this is on your list and that you've got someone speaking up from your city, from your region.
Thank you, Ariel. So there was a note in the chat to repeat the bill number. The DLCD budget bill number is House Bill 5027. Ariel, if I could just clarify, because we could have people on the call who are new. Is there a website on the state or on the LOC where people can figure out how they go about registering to testify or submitting testimony? Where can they find resources on that if they've never done it before?
So if you go to the Oregon Legislature OLIS legislative website, there are at the very top, there's resources for members of the public. And I believe we also have resources on the LOC website that tell you how to submit that testimony. So we can get that link in the chat for folks. And maybe that's something we can also just be including in our weekly bulletin going forward, of just the link on the instructions so you have it handy. But also please feel free to reach out to any member of the lobby team and we can get you connected.
Excellent. Thank you for that follow-up, Ariel. And then I think, correct me if I'm wrong, we got some updated information on the governor's emergency orders. Can you provide some information on that for our members?
You bet. So as I think everyone knows, the governor on her first day in office issued 3 executive orders, one of which declared a state of emergency due to homelessness. But it declared a state of emergency in 7 specific areas in the state that excluded it's divided by the continuums of care, which are the federally designated kind of data points and funding structures through HUD, and excluded the balance of state, otherwise known as the rural Oregon continuum of care, which includes 27 counties and 157 cities. So our messaging has been very strong since that the full state needs to be considered, that there are many communities experiencing emergency conditions related to homelessness and that need resources and assistance. And this is critical because her budget proposal, this early budget package, she's proposed 130 million, the majority of which would only be eligible for those emergency areas. Now, I know that the legislature knows that the entire state has needs, and we have some strong champions arguing and ensuring that this early, the budget package itself, the legislature decides, right? So there's definitely some strong voices ensuring that that's going to be available statewide. At the same time, there is a mechanism if your community would like to be included in the emergency declaration. It does have to go through a county, but there's more information available now on the governor or on the Oregon Housing Community Services website. I'm going to put the link in the chat in just a minute, where a county can declare a state of emergency, and then they can petition in to through the state to the governor's office. The governor is going to be completing her first scheduled review of the emergency order on March 10th. So if that is something that you and your county are wanting to do, we are encouraging you to get that in as soon as possible, but no later than March 10th. And you will have to point to some specific data points to be eligible. And this is the first time they've actually provided this, in writing and clearly what they're looking for to be included as an emergency area. That's that your unsheltered population in 2022 must be greater than 30 households. You have to have had declared that state of emergency. And then there's two data points. You can either show that your unsheltered rates of homelessness have increased by 50% or more between 2017 and 2022, or show that the 2022 rate of unsheltered homelessness was 80% or greater. One key thing about this is it does, as we understand it, unless things are changing rapidly, that it has to be the county that declares the state of emergency and petitions in. That said, if you're feeling like that's not a reality or an option, that your county's not going to be interested in doing that, I don't think it hurts for the city to pursue this. And so there is an email address. It's an OEM, Oregon Department of Emergency Management address online, and it's in the bulletin article, and it's in the link I just shared in the chat, where you can email and you can and make that request. I think that it's important that we get that in writing, that there are cities with emergency needs, and it may not be optional or an option for you to go through the county in these situations. So if you want to discuss more about that, please feel free to reach out to us, either to myself or to Scott Winkles, who's point on emergency management issues, and we'll work through this. We continue to advocate with the legislature and with the governor's office for the full state's needs on this. And so any information you have from us for us that would be helpful, that you want elevated, please feel free to share with us, and we'll continue to share information as we get it.
Thank you, Ariel. And kind of building on that request to share, would it be helpful for you and Scott in your work to know if a city has filed an emergency declaration, so you can help make sure we're following up with it?
Absolutely. That would be incredibly helpful. Thank you. I know that our partners at AOC as well, the Association of Oregon Counties, are trying to be supportive and, working with their county members to make sure that individual cities and communities' needs are being met. Excellent.
Thank you very much for your time, Ariel. Before we pivot really quickly onto public records, I would like to note Lindsay Tennis, another lobbyist with the organization, in the chat has put a specific link on how you can submit testimony. So if that's new for you, please look in the chat and make sure you copy that link before this ends. I want to shift our focus now to public records. We have 3 bills to present with you today. Scott Winkles is the LOC lobbyist who handles our public records portfolio, as well as public safety and a bunch of other general governance matters. So Scott, can you give us an update specifically on House Bill 3111, Senate Bill 160, and Senate Bill 417, please?
Certainly happy to do that. And I will start off with good news for us. Is House Bill 3111, which was introduced at the request of the League of Oregon Cities, closes a loophole that jeopardizes the private personal information of our employees or volunteers, some of our non-elected officials, such as your board and commission members. We make a very simple change in the statute that just says if the city or the agency holds these personal private information, such as contact info, home addresses, cell numbers, emergency contact information, anything of that nature, that regardless of what type of record we hold it in, it's protected. The bill also trues up the protections for the non-PERS retirement system, public retirement systems. And so if you're not a PERS employer, your public retirement system records don't receive the same privacy protections that the PERS systems do. We true that up. The bill got a hearing this week. It went very well. No one testified in opposition to the bill, which was actually pretty surprising to me, given the way this issue was received in previous sessions. Great hearing. scheduled for work session on the 16th. We expect it to get reported out over to the House. And we're laying the groundwork in the Senate right now. So that bill, I think we're in pretty good shape on that bill, and it's an important piece of legislation to get out in a timely manner. The other bills are a little more complicated for us. Senate Bill 160, introduced at the request of Senator Dembro from Portland, and he was sponsored by Senator Dembro, but at the request of the Society for Professional Journalists, I believe, places some mandatory discounts and fee waivers for requests that were made in the public interest, make certain assumptions about requests made by members of the news media. It's a very expensive bill. The league did testify very briefly in opposition to the bill. The hearing got truncated, so we were up there for about 30 seconds each. But we did express our concerns. Senate Bill 417 is probably the more likely vehicle to move out of the rules if something does move. The bill is at the request of the Public Records Advisory Council, sponsored by Senator Thatcher. The bill does a number of things. I don't think it does any of them well. It creates, it's supposed to codify existing case law. I'm not sure that's what they've done in the language. I think it makes bill is probably going to slow down records requests because it allows cities and other agencies only to bill public requesters for the wages of the lowest paid employee capable of doing the work. So that's public records issues can get very thorny, and they require an experienced eye, and this is a profession. I mean, our city recorders are professionals, and they're not always, it's not always cheap to have to do this work. So that's moving forward. The bill also places some fee waivers, and not as extreme as in Senate Bill 160, but there are some waivers in there, particularly for the news media. The bills did not get reported out. They are not scheduled for a work session. Rather, the committee chair has asked that the interested parties, so the media interests, and then the local government community, sort of get together and see what we can work out. It's a little early to tell what the path for these bills are. I think you can expect to see some alerts coming from the league asking you to weigh in with your legislator on these issues as they start to wind their way through the process. But that's where we are now with these bills. So we have some good news and some less clear news.
Dot, can you give some context? What type of fee waiver, what does the fee waiver look like in these bills currently?
So they're structured differently in each one. The one, in Senate Bill 160, it staggers the fee waivers. So it's a 40% discount for news media for cities over 100,000 starting after the effective January 1 of next year. Then I believe it's 25 and 27, the bill would apply to all the agencies. It requires a 100% discount for a narrowed request. I don't think it adequately defines what it means by a narrowed request. That's in 160, the bill that was introduced by the journalists in competition with the PRAC bill. The other bill provides the waiver, assumes a 40% discount for requests made by the news media. It does give an appeals, or allows the city to make a finding that it's not in the public request, or that giving the request would interfere with other services. That's appealable to a DA. The way the DAs have viewed public records issues isn't really uniform, so I couldn't really predict how this bill would perform in any particular city. And then the concerning is the limitations on. It also limits how much you can bill, or the wages, the type of employee that you can bill for. So essentially, you're going to be asking the most inexperienced member of the staff to be fulfilling these requests. I think it's a really interesting choice because I think the legislature is inadvertently sending a message to agencies that this is where you incentivize these requests, is that you are going to give them to probably the most inexperienced person on your staff to do this work. I don't think this has been, the implications have been thoroughly considered.
Thank you for that, Scott. So when you said it's going to be a very expensive bill, it clearly will be with that much of a fee reduction.
Yeah, and I think the problem is that it's going to hit different. It's going to be felt so differently because the appeal process goes to the DAs, and I don't think there's any uniform philosophy among the DAs on how to deal with these sorts of issues.
All right, and then just one last question, just for clarification. Is there a definition of news media that people can rely on in the proposed bill or elsewhere in statute? There
is this was an interesting development, and thank you for bringing that up, is that the news media, when we've talked to the news media on these bills in the past, we've always asked for a definition because we don't have one in statute. And the media had always gotten their backup over how they're defined. So the bill does include a new definition. For the first time, they've agreed to a definition of media in 417. And so it's they're looking at things like the legacy publication. So your historical newspapers, your TV stations, your radio stations. I think there probably is a way for a blogger to claim a media credential for purposes of this bill. It's not easy, but it could be possible. So they did give that in the bill, which I think was some level of progress.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate the update. We're going to move away from public records, hopefully to something a little bit more uplifting, and we're going to talk about ratepayer assistance. So I'm going to ask LOC lobbyist Michael Martin, who handles our water, wastewater, solid waste, and natural resources portfolio, to unmute and give us an update on House Bill 3125, which is related to ratepayer assistance. Michael?
Yes, thank you very much, Patty. Good afternoon, everyone. Michael Martin here. And this bill is, in short, a continuation of a first of its kind federal program that came out of the Consolidated Appropriations Act and the American Recovery Act, ARPA. And what it does is it provides water and sewer ratepayer assistance for low-income households. This bill was actually supposed to be heard yesterday, but as is part of the legislative process, we waited an hour and it got continued over and will be heard on Valentine's Day. So there'll be a lot of love for this bill if you could, lend your support for it. In effect, it provides $15 million, which goes out through the community action agencies. And, in the spirit of building statewide partnerships, I do really have to give credit to Oregon Housing and Community Services and the community action agencies. This money is it's almost all spent down. As you can appreciate, it's a very dynamic process, but it's almost all spent down. And I've talked to a lot of you about this, but there's a real challenge when it comes to infrastructure and affordability, and how that lack of federal cost share in infrastructure is pushing down. And there's a very good tie in here because utility costs are really a significant component of overall housing costs. And that really, what that means is that the ability to pay for water and sewer service is critical to housing stability, which ties into our large pieces of legislative agenda. So there is a bulletin article, which should have just hit your inbox, kind of outlines how you can participate and lend your voice in support of this bill. And happy, of course, my contact information is in there, and I'll put it as well at the end of the meeting, but would appreciate your support. Thanks.
And Michael, if I can, even though the money is going to community action agencies, do they have the authority to redistribute it to public utilities? Or can public
Correct.
utilities?
Yeah, thank you for, yes, it actually goes directly to the utilities. So someone comes in for assistance and then there's a individual contract and then, yes.
Perfect. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Yeah.
And we're not last, but our second to last topic of today is going to be presented to us by Nolan Plesha. He's going to give us an update on some broadband issues. Nolan is our lobbyist who handles telecommunications, broadband, cable, energy, environment, and cybersecurity. So Nolan, if you're available, if you could unmute and please give us an update on House Bill 3201, which deals with broadband.
Thank you, Patty, and thank you, everyone. So House Bill 3201 was just introduced on Tuesday and is the product of a broadband work group that was led by Representative Pam Marsh and Representative Mark Owens. This group included a broad range of stakeholders, including representatives from the Oregon Broadband Office, frontline community leaders, and public and private sector representatives. The aim of this bill is to bring Oregon statute into alignment with federal rules, guidance, and best practices by eliminating the unnecessary restrictions on the Oregon Broadband Fund. Oregon really has a historic opportunity to close the digital divide in our rural, frontier, and historically underserved communities and address the gaps that exist in access and deployment through the millions of dollars that the federal government has allocated for broadband. If we act, up to 700 million may be coming to Oregon from the ARPA broadband infrastructure funds and the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, also known as BEAD. And unless we address this, the digital divide will continue to grow, again, leaving many of our rural frontier communities as well as our historically underserved communities behind. So what's the problem? Like I mentioned, we have a lot of funding coming in. Federal agencies have actually advised the Oregon Broadband Office that the state may not receive all of the funding that is available due to the statutory restrictions in the current broadband fund that was created in SB 1603 in the first special session of 2020. Oregon has been notified that we may receive up to $200 million from ARPA and up to $500 million or more from BEAD. But again, none of that is actually guaranteed, and the final determination will be impacted by any limitations in state statute that conflict with federal guidance on spending. So if we can't spend all of it, we aren't going to get all of it. So the solution is House Bill 3201, which brings Oregon statute into alignment with federal rules by eliminating the unnecessary restrictions in a few ways. First, it ensures that funding can keep up with the changes in technology and requirements from certain funding sources, which necessitates a new process for setting speed standards through the engagement of the Oregon Broadband Advisory Council and diverse stakeholders. It's updating how broadband funds are spent by continuing to give preference to unserved areas and underserved areas of Oregon. It's promoting competition for grants by reinforcing a process for public notice and comments on all applications to ensure that any conflicts are identified and addressed early in the process instead of after the awards are given. And it addresses the need for a strong and fair challenge process for grant awards through an independent judicial review process as outlined in the Oregon Administrative Procedures Act. The LOC has led this effort, and I'm currently organizing stakeholders to support this bill. I would ask that any cities who are interested to support these efforts to please email me at nplesha@orcities.org. I'll make sure to add that in the chat in a moment. And if you can get that to me by the end of the day, this next Wednesday, February 15th, to be added to LOC's one-pager, I would very much appreciate it. If you wish to submit any testimony, written or verbal, to highlight the challenges in your community, please feel free to contact me for more information on that process. I'm also happy to answer anybody's questions that you may have. More information, the links to the bill and relevant committee are going to be included in today's bulletin. It did just get referred to the House Economic Development and Small Business Committee as of last night. And will probably be posted by the end of the day to be available next week. And lastly, I just wanted to note that there is one amendment that was just created, the -1 amendment. And again, all this amendment really is doing is just clarifying that any grants and awards through this program are going to have to go through the APA process just to ensure that entities have the ability to provide comments and challenge any potential awards if they disagree or feel that it's being overbuilt in the community. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you all may have.
So not from them yet, Nolan. We're going to wait that for the, I have one follow-up. If a city has questions about whether or not it would be considered underserved or unserved, is there a map? Is there a location they can identify whether or not they would meet the requirements for some of this?
So current statute defines unserved as anything under 10.1 or an underserved anything under 25.3 within a census block. So current standards and statutes would say even if you just have one address in an entire area of unserved entities, that community is served. This is focusing, and what the federal government did through the broadband or the BEAD program is define it by serviceable addresses. So there are new FCC maps. I will put the link into the chat for that as well, where you can actually look at the map. You can look at the different addresses that are within that map to kind of identify what speeds are available. And that's probably, I would say, your best chance of kind of identifying what is unserved and underserved within your community.
And one follow-up for those of us who are not as invested in this as you, when you said 10.1 and 25.3, what does that mean, Nolan?
That's a very good question. So we're talking about speeds. So when you're saying 10.1, you're saying 10 megabytes per second upload and 3 megabytes per second download. And so this is basically how quickly information is coming in and out. The higher speeds you have indicate how fast that information, how quickly you're able to download, how many devices you can have on any one system. So when you are only at 25.3 and you're struggling to get on a Zoom call, or your email's taking a long time to send, or you're taking a long time to load something, that's what those speeds are indicating. Standards on the federal level are raising it to 100 upload, 100 download for ARPA, or 100 upload, or 100 over 20 for the BEAD funding. So it significantly increases speeds. My worry is if we don't take action, a lot of the communities that are just going to be trying to get up to 25.3 are going to be again left behind in the digital divide, as our urban areas are going to continue to outpace them. And there are some issues in some urban areas as well, but the target is really our unserved and underserved areas in our rural and frontier communities.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the information, Nolan. Last, but by certainly no means least, Jim McCauley, if you can get ready to give an update. Jim is our legislative director, and in addition to being the director of our department, his portfolio includes transportation and wildfire. Jim's got an update for us today on a potential semiconductor package. Jim?
Right. Thank you very much, Patty. Good afternoon, everybody. So my focus here for the next couple of minutes is really to make a pitch and make sure that every one of you get an opportunity to get some input in. And that means either physical testimony in front of the committee or some help with written testimony submitted. So there is a semiconductor package that continues to get, I'll just say, information within the Joint Committee on Semiconductors. So it's both you have members from both the Senate and the House on this. It's a bipartisan party, and the whole point that this committee was, or whole reason this committee was put together, was to effectively come up with a package. And that package was going to be both addressing policy issues, but also providing funding. And these basically are going to be following along the recommendations of a task force that Governor Brown had put together and submitted that, or had a final task force report in the summer of 22. So we are nearing a pretty key point this next week. We're actually going to see some details from the governor's budget on this semiconductor package, which is really critical for it moving forward. The placeholder that's in the budget right now for the governor is $200 million. It's short of what the task force was recommending, which was well north of 500 million. But I think what I'm trying to make sure that you understand is that the only way we are going to have success on moving this package intact, which means intact with 200 million, is to make sure that there is overwhelming support across the state, across the business community, across many of the other interests and stuff that will benefit from this package. I think folks recognize that the vast majority of the economic development that takes place in Oregon really falls on local government. So those tax abatement programs that are out there, strategic investment program, but also the E-zone program, programs that exist, those really are the drivers for local governments. This is really the first time we're going to see a substantial commitment from the state with this $200 million marker. What we don't know, again, are the details, and we likely are not going to know that until probably Wednesday of next week. This information is going to be in front of the committee on Wednesday evening. So the Joint Semiconductor Committee meets both Monday nights and Wednesdays from 5 o'clock until 7. And we are asking for as many of you as possible to reach out to the committee, submit testimony. For those of you that can actually testify during the evenings, please register. They want to hear from real people. We've provided testimony as part of government affairs. That's part of what we do on behalf of the organization. But what they're really kind of diving down into now is they want to hear from other local officials that are out there. One thing that's important to keep in mind is that your community may well not get physical money, but there are others that will. And I think the important point here to try to build on is that this is really an important tool going forward. It's an important package for the state. And even more important, if Oregon can demonstrate that it's interested in economic development by putting $200 million into the system, we're going to be more successful at attracting additional funding from the federal government. So the CHIPS Act, which was passed in 22, has a $52 billion placeholder. And there are many states out there right now that are lining up to try to get some of that federal money. That's going to be incredibly helpful for Oregon to get that. But the first step that we really have to take is to make sure that everybody across this across the state is on board supporting this semiconductor package, because really the benefits of it extend well beyond the footprint of the actual manufacturing site itself. And if you were to look at just the Intel footprint here over the last several decades, that impact for the rest of the state is not just measured in the actual fabrication facilities that are out there or just the workers that are going into work every day, because there are businesses that relocated to Oregon for that. You look at just the educational system between the 3 engineering schools and the programs that they put in place. Actually, the entire university system itself has benefited from this because of the type of business template that Intel has and able to provide those job opportunities. Obviously, the community college system has too, because they built curriculum around making sure that they can get technicians out the door who make a considerable amount of money with only a couple of years of education. So this truly is a statewide benefit. And even for, again, those communities that may not have a direct benefit from the fabrication facility being built in your community. So this will be in the bulletin along with the other issues that we've discussed today. That continues to be our primary conduit for members. It's on the front page. You'll be able to go straight to it, read about it. And there's links in there to not just this joint committee on semiconductors, but other issues related to the bills that we've talked about today. And I will say that your grassroots efforts have a really big impact. I mean, we can speak on behalf of 241 cities, and we do that every day, but hearing from local elected officials is of critical importance to us. And I think it's very helpful to the rest of the legislature when they're hearing this bill and other bills, so they really get a feel for statewide support and making sure that the support isn't just coming from one particular region. So that's all I have. Hopefully everybody understands.
Thanks, Jim. I got just a quick follow-up question for some clarity. You were pretty clear that even though not every city will have the footprint of the semiconductors, there will be a benefit statewide. Is the league asking for support from elected officials and city officials from across the state, even if they won't hold the actual footprint? Would that be helpful?
Yes, because the scale of this footprint isn't just going to be I'll say a 500-acre site in Washington County, as an example. There are other pieces of the semiconductor sector that have a smaller footprint and may only need a 20-acre site or a 40 or 100-acre site. So that's part of trying to spread the investment beyond just one county. And there will be opportunities potentially out of this package for states in Eastern Oregon, Southern Oregon, and kind of in between to basically take advantage of some of these investments directly. And then again, the indirect piece in terms of having that overall investment in Oregon, because part of the drive here is to make sure Oregon remains an anchor in the semiconductor industry globally. I probably said it once or twice before, but that facility that's Intel has in Washington County is the global center for research and development on semiconductors. There is no other facility that matches it, not just in the country, but across the globe. So immediate value for an opportunity there, but definitely when you start looking at the other smaller communities and other parts of this semiconductor package, there's going to be other additional value out there. And it looks like Lindsay's might want to add something to that.
Lindsay, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. If you didn't see me on the meeting last week, Lindsay Tennis, I'm the tax, finance, and economic development lobbyist for LOC. And then the other piece I wanted to add is just, I think in the semiconductor conversation, there's a lot of talk about economic development incentives that you are all already using and are already effective, like enterprise zones. Specifically the industrial lands subcommittee also recommended funding for industrial site development, because there has never been really a funding mechanism for that. And so, those programs definitely have cascading effects statewide. And so I think there's just, specifically semiconductor, but also just, the larger cascading effect of poising Oregon as a state that really values and invests in economic development, I think is the key part of this conversation.
Thank you for that follow-up, Lindsay. So that's going to conclude our primary presentation of bills, and actually why we're here, since Lindsay's on the screen. Lindsay didn't give a direct presentation today, but she is one of our lobbyists who focuses most exclusively on economic development, finance, and taxation. Lindsay, I'm sure you already have, but I'm doing this from my phone, so I can't really see the chat today. But if you haven't, please make sure that your information's in the chat as well for our members. So now that concludes our actual presentations from our lobbying team. And what we're going to do is, if you have a question, we're going to ask if you could put it in the chat, or we are going to ask you to raise your hands. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Kevin Toon, who is our Communications and Business Development Director, to unmute himself and call on people as they need, as he sees them with questions. I had some technical difficulties with my computer, and so I had to do this from my cell phone, and it's just not big enough to let me actually see people raise hands or chats. So Kevin, if you can kind of facilitate the Q&A, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, no problem, Patty. There were two questions in the chat. So why don't we go to those first? From Bill Gropp, does the committee have, I guess this is for Jim, does the committee have goals for semiconductor growth in Oregon? And he asks if there are metrics.
It's a great question. And the answer is no. There's nothing specific in terms of numbers or metrics. So the measurement for growth is truly going to be a question over the scale of this investment package. So if we're sitting at $200 million, and part of that money can be used for infrastructure development, that will literally be the first time the state has produced physical, we'll say, lottery money or general fund money to help pay for that on the front end, which will be considerable. So outside of that, the idea is to grow more and to have a stronger anchor for semiconductors in the future. One of the interesting pieces to all of this, I think many folks know, certainly as a result of the pandemic, that chips basically go into virtually everything, right? From obviously the phones, the computers, but vehicles, they're going into microwaves, dishwashers, et cetera, et cetera. So about 70% of the chip market is actually in Taiwan. So we got to flip that supply chain in a different place for long term for any number of reasons and stuff. And that's ultimately what the federal legislation is focused in on, is to make sure that we can establish the United States back into the role of being the primary chip maker worldwide. They were invented here, and there's no reason why we can't spring off of that investment.
I'll just add to that really quickly. I think, you know, a metric that the committee sort of will be able to measure after these investments are made are, you know, whether or not projects applying for federal dollars from the CHIPS Act are locating in Oregon, you know. So, and we heard a representative from the governor's office testified in the Joint Committee on Semiconductors that like the top priority for federal agencies when they're looking to give out those money is investment from the state. So I think it's a big criteria the state is looking at, is whether the investments that we are making help projects get CHIPS money to either like locate in Oregon or grow their business here in Oregon.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you both. A couple more questions on this same topic on semiconductors. From Mayor McCardle in Independence. For Jim. Jim, please outline why communities outside the metro area should support the semiconductor bill.
Yeah, so a couple of pieces. One, certainly to be able to get this type of investment, we're going to qualify for these additional federal funds, which are going to be able to work their way in more than one community. So there is some shared value out there for the immediacy and the actual future construction, we'll say, manufacturing of these chips in Oregon. So our hope is the more of you that are able to participate and show your support for the semiconductor package will have the ability to basically advocate for the value that will go beyond, we'll say, just one individual manufacturing site. And because we're also talking about a range of sites, not everything is sitting at 500 acres because those sites really don't exist in this state. Those smaller acreages that are essentially shovel ready, 20 acres, 40 acres, up to 120 or 200 acres, there is the ability, especially with this CHIPS Act funding, to get more money into some of those communities. So I can't guarantee that every community that's on this call right now is going to get some direct funding from the semiconductor side, but I can certainly tell you that the more advocacy we have from each one of you, the better chances we're going to have at a much larger pool of federal funding coming into the system. And we're going to have success with the $200 million footprint that the state's willing to at least talk about right now, investing in the state.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Let's keep going. If I can look at my chat here. Another one for you. Quick question, Jim. Is there a specific bill number? This is from the city of Hines. Is there a specific bill number for the semiconductor topic?
Not yet.
Okay.
We should have that by Wednesday. So yeah, the last 3 weeks or 4 weeks, it has basically been an information building segment talking about this and more or less just a vision going forward, but we'll have a physical bill number on Wednesday.
Okay, sounds good. Just a quick time check. We got about 10 minutes left. So let's just to our members of our lobby team, let's make sure we're cognizant of the time with keeping our answers short if we can. Let's go next to Mayor Alex Johnson of the city of Albany. If you can unmute yourself. And you
I'm unmuted. I am. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
So I totally agree with Mr. McCauley, Jim McCauley saying that we have land in Albany, and our economic development manager did testify to the legislature about the CHIPS Act monies. We do have an ask-in through our representative, Shibbolsart Davis, and also Senator Gelser Lewin. We have a piece of land that was slated for a PepsiCo factory that they bailed on, so we took them to court. So that land's ready. We just need a railroad crossing to make that land will be shovel ready. We put water and services out there already, And we have a second piece, it's about 130, 140 acres that's available as well. So I want all of us to encourage them getting off of the metro area. And if you're building, that's more of a thing where we can tell them we have places for your employees to live at a lower price range than what you're paying up in those areas. So let's support each other in getting that money out of the metro area and more some of these rural communities. That's all I got.
That's great, Mayor. I appreciate it. That's, again, the whole point of this overall semiconductor package is not to benefit just one community or one region. That's really important, I think, for everybody to understand on the call, is that we've all got skin in the game here for trying to make sure that we've got this money, number one, coming from the state as a placeholder, and a commitment to this investment. And again, more importantly, the ability to attract some of the billions that are literally out there and waiting to be placed in states that are willing to take a serious step forward on economic development. There was a quick question in here on $200 million figure for this. Honestly, it came down to really, I'll just say, budget ability. There's a lot of other asks that are out there at this point in time in the governor's budget, and 200 million is an awesome place to start with, because before this we had zero.
Thanks, Jim. Let's squeeze in a couple more here. This next one is from Gary Milliman. Is the LLC working to oppose House Bill 2418 related to new municipal courts and supporting Senate Bill 48, which could restore monetary penalties for violation of mandatory school attendance law?
So Kevin, Scott Winkle's here. Those bills are mine. 2418 does not show signs of life. So willing, if that changes, we'll certainly engage on the bill. I don't think the bill has a bright and shiny future right now. 48 is, I think, if OSBA, the school boards, or the education interests want us to engage on that, because that's one we would have to work together, I think we could certainly do that. I'm not sure what the appetite in that committee, in that education, which we don't really plan that much, is for that bill. But it's certainly something that we would assist our education partners if that was something that they were asking us for. But it's really something we'd have to work together with on.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Patty, I'm just seeing one more hand raised, and it's from Joe Barker. So Joe, can you go ahead and ask your question?
Hi, thank you. My name's Joe Barker. I'm a concerned citizen first, and secondly, I'm a member on two committees of LOC. My first is a comment dealing with 417. I've been attending the PrAC meetings, and I could be completely wrong, but it was my understanding that it would be the salary of the lowest paid employee that would be used to dictate the cost per hour, not necessarily the lowest paid employee, like a clerk of some sort. It would still go through the records management, city clerk, whoever. The second is actually a question dealing with 3201. Going through the EPA process, is there a potential for having a streamlined process instead of the long-winded, drawn-out EPA review? Thank you.
Yeah, so it's the APA process, stands for the Oregon Administrative Procedures Act. So essentially what we did last year is we set up in House Bill 4092 within OBAC these sub-grant committees where OBAC will put these together. People can volunteer to serve on these committees, but the people who volunteer to sit on them have no skin in the game. So any grant applications that are coming in through the broadband office for any kind of awards will run through these committees. They can set up more than one. So that's kind of our first line of giving kind of independent oversight of how these grants are being awarded. What the APA process essentially outlines, and this is a typical process set up by rules for many different agency programs. We're calling it out in this bill to just recognize that we are going to have a process to make sure we are addressing any kind of conflicts before awards are actually given. It puts out a public notice and comments on each of these applications. Again, so that different entities can weigh in if they have any concerns about whether or not a particular application is going to overbuild any particular area, to really make sure that they are taking into account all the information and data out there before these subcommittees make their recommendations on which awards should proceed. The final backstop is that judicial review process. We hope that it doesn't have to go to those processes, but that's really at the very end after the awards are given. And that's where if somebody, again, still feels like, hey, this should not actually be given for these reasons, there is that independent process. Right now, it's could potentially be a much more drawn out process, because if somebody applies for a grant, the Broadband Office goes through that procedures to award those grants. And then after that, there's a whole challenge process that they can go through, not to mention that any provider can automatically say that we have the right of first refusal and we want to deny this grant application and give them a whole year. So that current process, I believe, is much more drawn out. The reason we chose the APA process is really to kind of streamline that process from where it currently is, but then again, to take into account other considerations. So we're really making sure we're diverting this money to areas that need it most.
Thank you, Nolan, for clarifying. And I must have had a hearing impairment under EPA and APA.
It could have been me too.
Thank you.
Okay, Patty, I think that wraps it up.
It does. So thank you for everybody who participated today. For those of you that are going to hang on for 2 more minutes, just 3 quick pieces of information, not necessarily legislatively related, but beginning next week, starting in the city of Toledo, LOC President Steve Calloway of Hillsborough will begin hosting a series of regional meetings throughout the state to introduce the organization's recently adopted 5-year strategic plan and to receive feedback from members on how you perceive the league is doing in managing and meeting your expectations. You can learn more about these regional meetings, including registering for one in your area, by visiting the LOC website at www.orcities.org. Additionally, we will be providing Public Budgeting 101 classes. These will begin on Tuesday, March 7th from 6 p.m. to 9 a.m. or 9 p.m. Sorry, so 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. on March 7th. There's a second one on Wednesday, March 8th from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. If you are interested in attending this training, you can register for it on the LOC website. The cost for an individual is $79. If you would want to send significant members of your city staff or city council, if you register 6 or more people from the same organization, it's only $395. And last but not least, we do encourage you to be on the lookout for information about our spring conference, which will be held in Seaside between April 25th and 26th. Registration for that 2-day event will open on February 22nd, so please keep your eyes peeled for that. We do hope that you attend all of these. Thank you again for attending. A reminder that all of the information we promised you would be in the chat is there. We will mute ourselves, but we will keep the webinar open until about 1:02 if any of you want to try and copy those links really quickly. And as always, please feel free to go to our website at www.orcities.org, and you can always find our contact information there. Thank you, and we will see you at the same time next week virtually. Have a great weekend, everybody.